And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. We got a jam-packed show for you today. And when I say jam-packed, I really mean it. A pair of transfer portal commitments for Oregon to start the week on Monday. Before we get into that, though, got to give you guys a little reminder. If you haven't already, go check out my interview with Luke Moga, Oregon's 2024 quarterback commit. That was yesterday's episode. You can find that on your podcasting platform of choice or on my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres, which is where we are coming to you live at, as well as on Twitter at mtorres sports. And I'm joined by Colin King, one of my writers over at Ducks Digest. He's been leaning into the recruiting coverage and doing a great job. Colin, how we doing, man?
Doing great. I mean, just a terrific ending to the transfer portal, potentially ending. Yeah, let's get into it.
Right on, man. Well, things are heating up for the Ducks on the recruiting trail. You know, I've been trying to hint at it for quite a bit. Not these two guys specifically, but, you know, two additions that make a lot of sense. And then we're going to break these two commitments down for Oregon and talk about kind of what they mean for the Ducks in 2023. And then also talking about kind of what's ahead for Oregon on the recruiting trail with some big names in the 2024 recruiting class set to come off the board at the end of the week on Saturday. I'm going to be getting on a plane in just like under 24 hours to head out to Phoenix and go see some of the top players in that area. So I'm stoked for that, including Luke Moga. So make sure you guys tap in on that. But let's break this down, Colin. I think the first guy that we can talk about is Eastern Carolina offensive line transfer Nishad Strother. He commits to Oregon with 1 year of eligibility remaining, tons of starting experience under his belt. I want to say it was about 30 games. So this is another big-time pickup for the Ducks along the offensive line. Maybe not as much of a well-known name, but I mean, just to kind of open it up, I want to toss it to you and kind of get some of your thoughts on this commit. Nishad Strother is a Duck.
Yeah, so with Strother, what you're getting is a guard that's obviously started for several, I believe it's 2 years now, around 30 starts. And this is definitely your contingency plan for if Marcus Harper's injury is too serious. Also, if you don't want some certain O linemen to step up yet, or you don't think they're quite ready, this is a perfect kind of pivot. This is a guy that's going to be experienced, can help develop from a player standpoint some of the other guys that are lower than he is, yes, on the depth chart, and really just brings more experience to an O-line that was needing quite a bit of talent after last season. I wanted to talk about your point about the eligibility. I believe he has 2 years left.
It might be two. That might be my bad. Because he redshirted in 2019 and then played in 2020.
But he is a fifth-year junior. I saw that, which, yeah, he was in the 2017 class, I believe, is what I saw, which is crazy. And this will be really, really interesting to see, like, kind of how it unfolds, and also how Harper, like, rebounds from his injury, how serious it is, and we'll see.
Yeah, so I just looked it up real quick. It looks like he came out of high school in 2019 out of Havelock, North Carolina. So he stayed, you know, in the Carolinas for the first part of his college football. But yeah, so he redshirted and then played in 2020. So I don't know. Would he have? This seems like a pretty simple equation, but COVID's messing things up and it's making it harder to figure things out. Because so he basically started in 2020, which wouldn't count. So he redshirted and then didn't play. So then you have 2021 and 20. I think 2 years. 2 years.
I don't know. From what I was seeing is that he was a fifth-year junior. That's what I saw, and I'm like, what? I don't know. That's just what I've read from a few sites that have talked about it. And then this is pretty interesting.
Yeah. So maybe I guess we'll have to do a little bit of digging there. But I think if he played in 2021 and 2022, those are the two seasons that counted. So I think we can try to operate on 2 years of eligibility, but we will have to double check that there. That's obviously a layer of the impact there in his recruitment and his commitment rather. But as far as Strother, he's a guy who played a lot at guard. So I think he projects to play along the interior of Oregon's offensive line. Where things were at exiting spring ball, you were looking at Marcus Harper II and Jackson Powers Johnson as your two primary candidates to take over at center, with Alex Forsyth now playing in the NFL for the Denver Broncos. But yeah, I think that's really kind of you hit it on the head just in terms of this. This gives you some more flexibility when it comes to that group that you ultimately want to roll out, because I feel like they probably feel good about their two tackles with Josh Connerly Jr. and Ajani Cornelius. And then you kind of have to figure things out at center. But right now, Jackson Powers Johnson probably has the lead on that job, if for nothing else, because Marcus Harper is hurt right now, so he's not able to go through stuff. But they're going to be duking it out. And then you also have Junior Angelau, who was another addition the Ducks had along the offensive line coming over from Texas, also projected along the interior, but he didn't play in the spring game. And I think that you kind of have a little bit more of a question mark there. Really talented player. He's played a lot of ball, but we just haven't been able to see him at full health since he's committed to Oregon.
Well, yeah, and you also saw that he had an injury last year, which is why he didn't play as many games. It's Angelau, of course. So it'll be a big question. I think there's a lot of question marks also for other positions that we brought in that Oregon brought in transfers at. You saw like Gary Bryant Jr. at wide receiver, how that's going to unfold. They also brought in Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson at wide receiver as well. It'll be very, very interesting to see what Oregon does with its depth chart, how they order things for sure, and also how much they rotate players, which is something that we could even maybe see in the O-line. Obviously, you want your starters to play a lot of time, right? But if they think a player's too good to not have on the field, and let's say someone isn't having like a great game or something, then you can rotate.
Yeah, no, so that's honestly what really benefits Oregon with this addition, is that they're able to have some of that flexibility. And like you said, maybe you don't have to rush some of these injuries along. Maybe you don't need to rush some of the development along with some of these younger guys that the Ducks have added recently, or they have in the program, like Afaope Laulu. George Silva is another guy who came in from the JUCO ranks. Definitely has a body that's ready for D1 college football, but he's still relatively inexperienced just in terms of playing the game of football. I think he looked good in the spring game, but I'm not sure that's a guy that they think is going to be playing a lot, in his first year. So now with that being said, I think we're getting a good feel for where the offensive line is at for Oregon. And I think it's just a really unique situation with the transfer portal, because if Oregon was in this situation of losing so many starters from last year, just a couple years ago, before the transfer portal was popping how it was, I think you'd head into the 2023 season with a lot more question marks along the offensive line. But here we are in mid-May, and I think we have a decent idea, at least, of some of those guys who are probably going to be slated in the starting offensive line. And then you also have to figure out where Stephen Jones lines up. I think he'll probably take one of those guard spots, but this is where it comes in handy that they've had a lot of guys that have been cross-training. Stephen Jones has played some tackle during his time at Oregon. I think most of it's been guard, but you just give yourself more options, and you're also looking at a position where you're probably taking less of a step back from an offensive line standpoint, just because you're raising the floor with all these experienced guys that you've added.
Well, yeah, and to go off of that, exactly. I mean, you look at Oregon talking about, well, Dan Lanning talking about iron sharpens iron, and you've seen that said several times, not just by Oregon staff, but also by other like recruiting analysts or whatever. Just mentioning that, and it really does speak volumes to what Dan Lanning has done. He's really raised the bar between the top guys, and he's kind of filled in, I guess, there at the middle. Where there was an obvious talent gap, he added in players to kind of reduce that talent gap, and the players that were at the bottom have seen themselves transfer out.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, maybe that's another point that we can get into here about what this commitment kind of means for the Ducks. I think that you had the previous two additions, Ajani and Junior, kind of filling, obvious needs when you lose guys like Sala and Walk and Bass. But then you add in Strother, sorry, and I think this goes also to the point that we're going to talk about a little bit more with Nico Reed, this wasn't a guy that they needed like desperately, Colin. I think it kind of speaks to the point of this is kind of a luxury that Oregon's able to have with the transfer portal, because you're not in a position where you're not feeling good about the group that you already had, but you're able to feel even better about it now that Strother's in the mix. And then with the guys that they added from the portal, and then some of the guys that they have coming back that were already on the team, this is going to be some really good competition for Alik Terry's room heading into 23.
Well, yeah, and for his first year, and you're also looking, recruits have loved, from what I've been hearing, recruits have loved what he has done so far on the recruiting trail. And I've heard that it's really not much of a drop off, if at all, a drop off from Adrian Clem down to Alik Terry, which is very, very good news for Oregon, especially in recruiting. And also just the O line has been, I don't know, I'd say the O line has been a very, very good unit over the past, I don't know, 5, 10 years. There's obviously give or take some years that aren't great, but yeah, some years have been very, very good and keeping up to the standard. And it'll be very, very interesting in general, I guess, as to see how this competition plays out in terms of who's going to get the playing time, but also like who is going to rotate in, who's going to be the last guy, who's going to be the guy riding the bench, because someone has to do it, unfortunately. I mean, you brought in all these O linemen, which is a part of what Lanning wanted to do, beef up the trenches. And he's done that successfully, but who's going to be the odd man out? Who do we see that isn't going to get the playing time?
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at it through that lens from a playing time and just the overall depth of the group. Because I remember when I was talking about Gary Bryant's commitment to Oregon, the USC wide receiver transfer. I was saying that Oregon was in a championship window, which is maybe something that we can talk about in terms of these two commitments that the Ducks got today. But one of our listeners, DM'd me and is like, "Whoa, Max! Like, I don't think that they have the guys along the O line to compete for a title right now. With some of the big time guys they're going to be going against in the trenches." But now you look at Oregon's offensive line and what Alik Terry, Mike Cavanaugh, Cutter Leftwich have been able to do over the course of the offseason. And you're looking at a group, you said, who rides the bench or, who comes off the bench. You're looking at a group that can probably go 6, 7, 8 deep in terms of just guys that are ready to hop in and contribute for you in meaningful games and play meaningful snaps. And I think, again, that's where you want to be. Oregon's defensive line, loaded, absolutely loaded. That wasn't the conversation we were having about the offensive line. And I'm not saying it is the conversation we're having about the offensive line, but with all the people that they've lost, I think it's much more of a talking point now that you add Nishad Strother.
Yeah, and I wonder if you want to transition now. I just want to briefly touch on defensive line here because you mentioned it. Last year we were having conversations. We thought maybe preseason that this unit looked pretty good, the D line, that is. Then you look at games like Oregon State, and you just kind of were baffled at how bad they were, how they weren't able to adapt. And then you wondered why everybody left from the D line. Like a lot of people left from the D line. That's because they weren't getting significant playing time. I remember there were conversations about why Braden Swinson left, because he was a key player in the game against Ohio State, if I recall, when Oregon marched into Columbus and knocked them off. But then he barely saw playing time this year, and then he goes still high D1 in the SEC. I think that kind of speaks to what the staff thought about former players as well, which I think plays into your O-line as well, why a bunch of those guys, the reserves, left too. And really, it's about Lanning getting his guys he wants, and then also Alik Terry, now that you have a new O-line coach, getting the guys that he wants too.
Yeah, and I think overall it just speaks to the urgency that this staff is hitting the portal with. Because I said that with the Gary Bryant commitment too. Maybe the wide receiver depth wasn't great as you start spring ball, but I think we exited spring ball feeling pretty darn confident about where that group stands. And then you add in Gary Bryant, and you have people asking who's he gonna beat out, or who's he gonna displace on that depth chart. So I think that that's definitely kind of a good way to break down or approach some of these transfer portal commitments for Oregon. And yeah, I think what you were saying, like, with Swinson, he's a guy who had been at Oregon for a while. And, he had a huge play in that, Ohio State game. I think they only had 2 sacks that entire game, his and DJ Johnson's. But with the era of the transfer portal, I think that you're kind of seeing less of a grace period in terms of guys that have been at their schools for multiple years and maybe just flat out haven't grown into the roles that coaches expected them to. And that was probably part of the reason that Swinson left is, and I'm not saying that I was told this or anything, but I'm just saying you can kind of look at it and say, hey, I remember when I was covering fall camp in 21, Mario Cristobal couldn't find enough good things to say about Braden Swinson. And, he's a great guy and everything, but he just didn't necessarily live up to the hype that you maybe saw at Oregon. And I think that kind of played a role in his departure.
Yeah. And, I don't know if you're fine with moving to Nico Reed. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's wrap
Sorry.
on Strother, and then we can get to Reed. Yeah, I think that another part of it is just for Alik Terry in his first year leading the Oregon offensive line, it's just how could you ask for much better of a situation, right? You have guys that you've worked with before. Alik Terry has worked with Jackson Powers Johnson before he left to go to Hawaii and then went to coach in the NFL. So there's some familiarity from a personnel standpoint in that sense. And then you have a lot of guys. You're not just, hey, here's the Oregon offensive line coach. It's it's your first year. We got a bunch of young guys here. Just do the best you can. We'll cross our fingers and hope for the best. Like, no, you have dudes here who have contributed at previous stops, who've started a lot of games. Look at how Bo Nix must be feeling. Seeing
and they also got developmental guys too, which is like they didn't just settle with what they had, and that's a big part of having Alik Terry, right? Like, obviously stepping in the building. Let's say it's like a new job. You step in and you're expected to do everything first day. No, there's gonna be people helping you, and Lanning and the staff did that. They helped Alik Terry out quite a bit right away, bringing in all these guys that they wanted or thought could be very good, whether developed or right away at Oregon.
Yeah, and I mean, to just further that point, it's not like it's not his first year. It's not Lee Terry's first year having his own room. He did it at Hawaii, but that being said, he is pretty young. He's only 27, and you have a guy like Mike Cavanaugh who has decades of experience there, to kind of help him just get the most out of this group and kind of refine his coaching philosophy. Which I think is such a cool thing that coaches do. I feel like very rarely will you find coaches that are so stuck up that they're just glued to their ways. This is how it's worked, and I'm not going to do anything. And I feel like that's kind of the sense that I've gotten from some of these other Oregon coaches is that they're always open to new ideas and to new approaches. But before we move on to the next commitment in today's episode, I want to just talk a little bit about Strother and kind of who he is as a player, because we talked about him just filling that need along the interior of the offensive line as a guard. But I was able to reach out to a source and kind of ask for their thoughts on Strother and what Strother brings to the table. His physicality. Maybe the most physical offensive lineman that was available in the transfer portal. And talking about his body type and how that fits, what the Ducks are looking for. 6'3", 326 pounds. We'd have an issue if he was in the 200s. 6'3", 326 pounds is what he was listed on the East Carolina roster at. A guy who finishes, his blocks, super powerful, plays with a high football IQ. That goes back to what we were saying about the starts that has under his belt. So I think things like that really make you confident that this Strother edition will be one that could really have a major impact on where Oregon's offense is headed in 2023. And then Bo Nix has to be smiling just knowing that he has another piece that's going to hopefully help keep him upright and moving forward into the 2023 season. Colin, any final thoughts for you on the Nishad Strother edition for Oregon?
I mean, mentioning like keeping Bo Nix up. Also, I think that injury to Bo Nix last season scared the heck out of Oregon. and kind of also showed them when Ty Thompson had to come in, showed them that last year he still wasn't ready. And that really scares them. Obviously, you want to protect your quarterback regardless of who it is, but I think there is still a little bit of a talent gap for sure there. And really keeping Bo Nix healthy, keeping him with, I guess, on track to stay at the same level that he was last year is goal number one. And you can see that with the additions on offense.
No doubt about it. Well, Oregon stays hot in the transfer portal on Monday, landing a commitment from former East Carolina offensive lineman Nishad Strother. And now we get to talk about another commitment for Oregon on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal. Former Colorado cornerback Nico Reed has committed to Oregon. Ducks are doing some double dipping on a Monday, and this was a really exciting addition for Demetrius Martin and the rest of the Oregon secondary, which has really been retooled in a big way, Colin. This off season, you lose Christian Gonzalez to the NFL. He was your lockdown corner and definitely someone that you kind of were able to turn to when you really needed a big play or needed to kind of lock down an opposing wide receiver one. But Nico Reed, another former Colorado guy that was coached up under Demetrius Martin. I really like this addition for Oregon because it shows that they're not settling in terms of just retooling this defense and trying to get to the next level.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it already with the Strother commitment. Iron sharpens iron. You cannot have enough talent in a certain room, and defensive back is no difference. Is no different at all. This is a guy who started 12 games last season. He had 42 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. He had a sack, 2 interceptions, and 9 pass deflections. He has, I believe, 2 years left of eligibility as well. And this is just a big commitment for Oregon because this is a smaller guy. This is, I believe he's 5'10". So he'll project probably in the slot, I would assume, slot/star. And this is just big because at very, very least, this is depth, very least. And I can assume, I would assume that he would be probably a top maybe 5, maybe 4 even corner on this team the second he steps on campus. And that connection to Demetrius Martin is big. You saw what he did with Gonzalez. I'm not at all comparing the two. They're not at all the same body type whatsoever. But you just took a number 1 corner from a team. Yes, last year was bad. That doesn't mean everybody on the team is bad. And also that he was a starting corner in a Power 5 conference like the Pac-12. This is a huge add.
Yeah, and that's worth mentioning, the competition that he was going against, even though Colorado didn't have a great season by any means. This isn't some, group of 5 transfer that you're kind of taking a flyer on and hopefully he works out, hopefully he can match the level of competition, the level of play from the rest of our guys. But this is someone that you can have some confidence in because he's played some good football, good ball skills, and he's around the ball, around the play a lot. Like you were mentioning with some of those stats there, didn't start as a true freshman, but he played in every game as a true freshman, which I think is awesome and just goes to the point that we were making about bringing in more experience and more production. 3 interceptions during his 2 years in Boulder. And also, I think a guy that adds some more value just as a playmaker. He did return a kickoff for a touchdown against Utah in 2021. That was 100 big ones. And I think that you see those skills also show themselves when you're able to, get an interception because you try to get some good return yards and set up the offense with good field position. And I think that this is just another example, Colin, of how valuable it is in today's era of the transfer portal to, maintain those connections, maintain those relationships. We saw it with perhaps Oregon's top transfer portal addition this offseason with Jordan Birch, since Dan Lanning recruited him when he was at Georgia. And those things, they keep popping up. And I think one reason that maybe, I think even more so than with Strother, I feel like this is even more of a luxury to kind of go back to that talking point a little bit at corner, because I think you're feeling good about the corner depth with Kyrie Jackson coming over from Alabama, kind of giving you a little bit more of that Gonzo body type. I think he's in the neighborhood of 6'2", 6'3". And, he's trying to kind of develop into that lockdown guy that Gonzo was, but, didn't necessarily say he was feeling the pressure to do that. He wanted to do it with his own swagger, I think was the quote during spring. And then you have Triquez Bridges, who's played a lot of ball, Dante Manny, who's kind of entering a put up or shut up year, as he put it this spring. And then Cole Martin balled out in the spring game, and you signed 4 other corners in the 2023 class. So you have a lot of options there. I think probably at least one guy from the 2023 class is going to see a decent amount of playing time, maybe how Reed did in his freshman year at Colorado. But now you're just injecting even more competition into that corner room, and I think you're raising the floor and the ceiling with this Nico Reed addition. And I mean, with the Demetrius Martin connection, this is a guy that he knows inside and out, and he's going to be on the fast track for development once he gets to Oregon.
Yeah, and the corner room is one that's going to be one that we watch very, very closely towards the start of the season, and really in the first game, especially because how much the freshmen play. You have a few guys that haven't even been on campus yet, the freshman corners, I mean. And that's Dalen Austin. You also have Roderick Pleasant, who, just a side note, ran a 10.09 100 meter in the state finals for California, which is insanely fast, second in the country. This is a really, really good group, adding more depth at very least. And it's just like one that you watch, you want to see this defensive back room improve, because you really haven't had a great secondary for a few seasons now. You've always had talent in the secondary, but you haven't always had a great group in terms of actually being able to shut down the pass. And I'm not saying that this group will be completely able to shut down the pass by any means. That is yet to be seen. But we'll definitely have to watch the development. Also, there's going to be a few summer practices, obviously, when the guys show up. And I think we'll get a better feel for who is going to be towards the top in terms of freshmen, and also the older guys, upperclassmen. Like in some of these practices, I think we'll find out.
Yeah, we definitely will. And I think it'll be interesting to see who can maybe get off to a faster start when it comes to a couple of those 2023 corners that you talked about calling. Dalen Austin out of Long Beach Poly. He's, you're more of your typical Lanning corner, tall, lengthy, fast guy. And then you have Roderick Pleasant, who's a little bit more Cole Martin-esque, right? A shorter guy, smaller frame, really explosive, really twitchy, short area burst, and can run with the best of them, of course. He's going for that 9.99 100-meter time, and I got to see him at Sarah last week, and he's definitely looking real fast, that's for sure. So that's a pair of All-American corners that aren't even on campus yet for Oregon, which is awesome to be in when you're just looking at where you want to take this group in 2023 and some of the wideouts that you're going to have to go against, at your USCs, at Washington, for sure. So I think that I like the addition from that standpoint too. And then another thing that would be interesting, just in terms of what this development for Nico Reed might look like. I had a source telling me that it might be kind of like a little bit of a Mekhi Blackman situation, another former Colorado defensive back who transferred to USC last year and played some really good football and played his way into being a 3rd-round draft pick this past NFL draft. So I think that, Demetrius Martin has obviously done an awesome job developing corners from Colorado. And I think that there's a reason that he wanted to go after Nico Reed, because the Ducks did miss out on Trey Amos, who committed to Alabama, the former Louisiana Lafayette corner. He was supposed to get out to Oregon for a visit, but the Tide were able to wrap that one up before Oregon was kind of able to get involved here. So not that he was a second choice necessarily, but it's an addition that makes a lot of sense. And again, the competition's looking really, really strong in there at corner.
Well, and yeah, I think it's interesting. Like he definitely was not he definitely wasn't a second choice. They kind of had to see that Amos wasn't coming because he never even came out for a visit. He visited Bama, did not visit Oregon. he was going to or did visit Michigan, but yeah, did not visit Oregon at all. Reed was one that he quietly did visit Oregon.
Yeah, this past
Wasn't
weekend.
anything, yeah, didn't post it or anything, I don't believe. Um, but yeah, he visited very, very quietly, and then that was pretty much just like that. They got it done, wrapped up today, obviously. And now you look at the roster, 85 scholarships. So there's still some guys obviously in the portal that, okay, maybe they're interesting. I saw a comment earlier saying, would it be interesting to bring in a tight end? Um, well, they brought in a few tight ends. They brought in Casey Kelly um, from Ole Miss, which I think is going to be depth. You saw them bring in Ludwig, who will be a preferred walk-on. He's a converted linebacker. He's at the body type. So he's 6'5", but I don't know if he's. I mean, he's gonna have to bulk up a little bit, and I don't know how his obviously catching is. He was redshirted his first year, 4 years of eligibility. That'll be interesting to watch. See if maybe next year he's on scholarship or not. And then you obviously have still the freshman Sadiq there. You have Terrence Ferguson, who is currently hurt, or is he recovered yet? I'm not sure.
Not. I don't think he's recovered just yet. I mean, he there were pictures of him at the spring game, and he was still kind of slinged up, for lack of a better phrase. But we'll have to wait until fall camp to see if he's revamped and ready to go.
Yeah, and then there's also, of course, Herbert there. So tight end, I mean, you have your three main guys you're really going to want to go to, and then Casey Kelly will probably see the field a little bit. I don't anticipate him seeing the field a lot unless, God forbid, some injuries happen. Um, but I just wanted to take a second to address that really quickly. I don't know if you want to transition back to Nico Reed or not.
Yeah. There's some more that we can get into there with Nico, and guys, I think we're getting some here. We're getting some questions in the chat. I'll try to go through and star these, but we're gonna probably have a mailbag portion towards the back end of the pod. So if you guys have questions or comments, go ahead and throw them in there. We'll do our best to answer them. And then go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate your support if you guys are tuning in, taking some time out of your day to talk some Ducks with us. I think another thing that we can talk about with Reed, 2 years of eligibility left. And I think that kind of factors into Oregon's approach in the transfer portal. You're not just getting a bunch of 1 year stopgap kind of guys. Oregon very obviously needed Christian Gonzalez last year, came in and played 1 year and was a tremendous asset to the team en route to becoming a first round pick. And then now you get guys like Strother and Reed here who have the potential to impact Oregon in more than just the 2023 season. So I think the longevity and the big picture, I think Gary Bryant has 3 years of eligibility left once he gets to Oregon. So I think that's an interesting wrinkle and an interesting factor to kind of consider here when you're looking at how Oregon is leveraging the portal, because it's more than just, hey, that guy's really good and he's in the portal. He can help us for 1 year. Let's go get him. It's like, no, that guy's really good. He fits us. We like him as a person, high character guy, and he can help us for more than just a single season.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know really what to add in terms of like Reed in general. I know that obviously I mentioned he's going to be a slot or star. Sorry, I was kind of reading the comments as well.
Happens to me too.
I think that this is obviously I've said it's a good ad, and I'm really interested to see how also Demetrius Martin does in year two, where he doesn't have necessarily the top guy per se, the definitive top guy, where he had Christian Gonzalez, um, and also where the room kind of shakes up, where Reed ends, where a guy like let's say Kyrie Jackson ends up another transfer, or Tyshim Johnson, or even we didn't even talk about the safeties yet. Um, we obviously have Evan Williams coming in, right? And that's a big one to talk about. That's obviously his brother Bennett was on the team last year. I don't know. It's a very, very much revamped secondary, which is good because the team got torched against Washington. But it's something that also, in addition to on paper additions and all that, the coaching, the adjustments have to be there, and it's also it's just really, can Oregon like put it all on the field, I guess. And they got to beat their rivals this year. They can't let that happen again. I was seeing a post yesterday. Oregon got swept in all major sports by Washington. That just can't happen. Um, and I know I'm obviously getting way off track in terms of talking about Nico Reed here, but it's just really 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 important for Oregon to just put it together. And that's something that Cristobal couldn't do. So I have to figure out really if obviously Lanning can do that with his defensive prowess and prestige.
Yeah, no, that's a great point we can hit on. Just, there was already a lot of pressure on Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy to figure it out, this defense in 2023. 2022's defense fell well short of the mark in a variety of statistical categories, right? Third down conversion, passing defense, a couple of games, the rushing defense was nowhere to be found. Washington and specifically Oregon State is the one that everyone wants to point to with that one. But now I think there's even more pressure because of a lot of these pieces that you've added from the transfer portal. Because it's not like you're going to be looking at it like, oh, we got a lot of highly touted recruits that came in, but they're still young and they just need a little bit more time. It's like, no, this is the era that we're living in. You bring in a lot of guys that have starting experience, that have played a lot of ball, that have produced at a high level. And I think that the margin for error shrinks when you do something like that. And that's kind of, something that comes with the transfer portal and just that added element of, accelerating, being able to turn around a program. I mean, look no further than what USC did last year in 1 year. That just shows you how quickly you can turn a program around. The defensive element wasn't all there for USC, and that's kind of what played into their downfall a little bit, right? But you make a great point, Colin. This secondary is really, really revamped, right? You add a pair of safeties with Evan Williams and Tysheem Johnson from Ole Miss. And I think another thing we worth mentioning is that Tysheem might not even just be a safety. He can be a guy that is playing all over the secondary. So Nikko, I'm not sure how likely cornerback is, but at least the reviews and the buzz coming out of spring football was that, hey, Tysheem Johnson's a guy that can do a little bit of everything for you in the secondary. So who even knows where he's actually going to line up? You kind of remove Jamal Hill from the secondary and kick him down to linebacker. And then you still have Steve Stevens and Brian Addison there. So you're seeing a lot of experience and production. Maybe the production isn't completely there, but a lot of experience and a lot of talent in that secondary now.
Yeah, and it's also I kind of grimaced at one of those names you said. Um, no offense to him, of course, but it's just that some of these guys are going to be replaced, and they have already been replaced because for lack of better use, I mean, maybe not as talented as others. And that's part of it. That's part of building your program. Just adding on to what we mentioned earlier, just you have to be recruiting and bringing in the top talent, or else you can't expect to be a top team. And I think that's where past Oregon teams have failed. Like a Cristobal team didn't necessarily bring in all the best transfers they could have. Sure, he recruited like crazy, but he couldn't really develop a lot of them. And that's just an issue that you look at in the past, and you just hope that Dan Lanning doesn't also fall into. And I think the staff is set up perfectly to not fall into that. But of course, obviously, looking at it, I'm going to be a little bit biased and think that everything is going to work out, but we know that it won't at all times. It's just going to be very, very, very interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I think that now that Oregon has these two new additions, it's probably fair to say that they're wrapped up. In the transfer portal, you never know, like you mentioned earlier in the show, but I think that Oregon probably feels pretty darn confident about just addressing some of those needs. And then, at receiver, O line, and now corner, hey, we kind of doubled down a little bit and added another guy. We added Gary Bryant, we added Nishad Strother and Reed. To really make like extra sure that you're feeling good about the depths at those spots. Is there anything else about Reed that you want to add before we maybe open it up to some mailbag and kind of start winding it down a little bit, possibly, Colin?
I just kind of want to reiterate that just because Reed wasn't on a good overall team that went 1-11, that doesn't mean that he is a bad player by any means. Um, obviously in the past we've seen bad Oregon teams have very, very good players on them. And it's just, I think it's something that
Shoot,
definitely,
I might have lost you. My mic disconnected. Can you hear me? Okay,
yeah.
you can hear me. Okay, let me maybe just just improvise for a second. I'll try to hop back out and hop back in. Sorry about that. I'll be right
All
back.
good. So what I was saying is that just like Nico Reed's not a bad player whatsoever. Um, I'm not 15, no. Thanks for the comment though. Nico Reed's not at all a bad player. This is a team that, yeah, was bad. Colorado was awful. Everybody acknowledges that. Dion comes in and he doesn't make it. I don't know. He forces a bunch of players out. That's going to happen on a 1-11 team. But like we've heard, or it's been talked about that Oregon or not Oregon, Nico Reed is a guy that uh, they wanted to keep. That was a starter last season, and that's a guy that obviously Dion would have been very, very happy to keep. Would have been probably the best or second best corner on that team, regardless of where you put Travis Hunter.
Yeah, and I'm able to hear you again. Thank God. Hopefully my mic hangs in there with me. But yeah, kind of just echoing what you were saying, Colin. You know, some of the people that I was talking to around the program were telling me the same thing. You know, this is a guy that you know, Nico Reed is a guy that Colorado is kind of going to be maybe looking back on, as you didn't want to let him get away. Seeing that he entered the portal just exactly a month ago, I think it was April 15th that he hit the portal. So there's high expectations for him. And I think he's going to be a valuable piece to that Oregon secondary and that Oregon corner room. Let's open up the mailbag a little bit, Colin. We have our first question from Andrew. Andrew's got a lot of questions in here. So if you guys want to match his energy, go ahead and throw a question in there. Andrew says, Max, who do you see returning kicks/punts with a GBJ, Gary Bryant Jr., coming in, because that's Pleasant's specialty too, isn't it? I think, yeah, as far as kicks go, I think Gary Bryant's going to be someone who definitely factors in there. Nico Reed obviously has some experience there. Troy Franklin is someone that's worth a mention. Chris Hudson has some experience doing it for Oregon. Troy Franklin got a little bit of reps as well. I want to say Bucky and Noah might have had a little bit of time on their return units, but there's no shortage of options here, and I think that those are some of the names to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there. I would assume that it would be Bryant Jr. and Nico Reed. I'm not entirely sure of that being Pleasant's specialty, just
Cortez.
because I don't watch quite a bit. I mean, I haven't watched his special teams like highlights, so I don't know. Max could probably speak to that more than I can. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, another guy worth mentioning probably is Tez Johnson. I don't know how much experience he has in the return game, but just when you look at his skill set and how explosive and quick and fast he is, the top gear that guy has, he's someone that might be in the conversation. And then Roderick Pleasant, that was part of the pitch with Roderick Pleasant, is that he might even get involved on offense as well and in special teams. So Oregon just has a lot of different ways that they can kind of attack you. And I think finding ways to get Roderick Pleasant the ball, maybe special teams is the way that you go about doing that next year. So those are kind of some of the guys to maybe keep an eye on when it comes to the return game, and who we could see contributing for the Ducks. Trello had a question here. Do you expect Nico to take Manning's minutes? Dante Manning, of course, the highest rated corner the Ducks have ever signed, but they're still kind of waiting for him to pan out. What do you think about this one, Colin?
It's an interesting one. I guess you could kind of say that Manning, in a sense, is like the Ty Thompson of the cornerback room. In a sense, you're waiting on him still to develop. I don't know, because they're not quite the same spot at corner, right? But it is still another body that's in the way of him seeing the field. Um, so if he can prove himself, then I'm saying Manning, of course. If he can prove himself, then I don't think this really affects him at all. But even if he stays kind of where he currently is, or maybe it gets a little bit better, um, then I don't think this will. I still don't think it'll really affect him too much. Um, I think that Nico Reed is still going to see a significant amount of time. So I really doubt that it affects Manning too much. He's going to be a rotational guy. He's not going to be a starter. We pretty much already know that at this point. But Max,
You're talking about Manning being a full time starter. You don't see that?
no. I'm saying I don't see Manning being a full-time starter. Yes, unless God forbid of injuries. I just think there's too many bodies there right now. You look at Bridges, you've got Kyrie Jackson, you've got a guy like Tysheem Johnson who could move down um, to corner if needed at slot, and you got plenty more bodies there as well. And then Nico Reed's just another one as well. So I don't personally, but obviously there's differing opinions.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And then maybe I wouldn't say that I see Nico taking, Dante's snaps, but at the very least, you can kind of compare these guys on paper. They're both 5'10, 185, 190 pounds. But it's just going to come, and maybe it could just come down to, who has the better fall camp between the two. And I think there's reason to think that Dante is going to, be a mainstay in the corner room just because he's been at Oregon longer and he's been coached by Coach Me, I guess the same amount of time one season, but he just has more comfort, I think, overall in that defense. And I need to look at a little bit more of Nico, but I feel like Dante is probably a little bit higher level of an athlete. But I think those are two guys in that cornerback room that we're definitely going to have our eyes on as fall camp kind of circles around. All right, let's see if we have any more here. Another one from Andrew. I'm curious how the Iowa transfer will play because Iowa's defense is always stout. Talking, of course, here about Justin Jacobs, the Iowa linebacker transfer, who arrives at Oregon, and he kind of already has the billing as the guy, right? Because Oregon's inside linebacker room, Colin, not exactly gushing with depth. I mean, Jeffrey Boss has played 2 full seasons at inside linebacker now. He's had some highs and lows. Jamal Hill's put on some weight, and he looked good in the spring game, but we don't have a whole lot to go off of from his standpoint, from a film standpoint, at linebacker. So I think Justin Jacobs is coming off of an injury. He's already drumming up some hype as a top NFL draft prospect for Oregon next year, along with the likes of Brandon Dorless and Jordan Birch. So I think there's reason to be confident that Justin's going to play some pretty good football for Oregon next year. And I think that the spring game was a step in the right direction, just back at 100% and flying around the football field.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. There was first round hype on Justin Jacobs before he got hurt last season, before he had that surgery. If he gets back to that level, yeah, I mean, this is going to be huge. It really just depends how he rebounds from that injury. Um, and if he does rebound well, then yeah, I think that, Oregon lands a steal here, I guess, essentially, um, with Justin Jacobs because he's a guy that could project as a first round pick at linebacker, which is becoming increasingly rare. But I think he has all the tools, and it'll just be very, very interesting to watch how he can get back from that injury because it was a season-ending injury too. So it wasn't anything that was just a minor nagging injury or something like that. It was just straight up season-ending.
Yeah, I think kind of what I saw from like doing some research on that injury, I think he got banged up, missed a couple games in 22, and then tried to come back and like re-aggravated it or made it worse. And then he was required to have surgery that brought an end to his 2022 season. And he was playing alongside guys like Jack Campbell in that Hawkeyes defense, and he was kind of the guy on that defense from what I can recall. And I think that when we talk about Justin Jacobs, he's going to be kind of one of those not trial run guys, but I just feel like he's a guy that Oregon fans and coaches and recruits are going to have an eye on in 2022 because it's kind of one of those big name guys that probably fits the Dan Lanning Tosh Lupoi defense to a T, and then you have one of those on each level, I think, of the defense, right? He's the guy at linebacker. And then Jordan Birch is the guy that everyone's going to be watching along the edge rusher, along the D line. And then you also have guys like Tysheem Johnson. You're going to have to see how Chris Hampton does in his first year coaching the safeties. And then, Kyrie Jackson and Nico Reed at the corner spot.
Yeah, and really quickly, I just want to address there's a comment saying, so is Oregon and Washington allowed to join the Big Ten if they want to? And then the following comment says, yeah, but the invite isn't coming. To which he responds, why not? So the Big Ten, from what I've been seeing, what I've been hearing, doesn't want to be a conference killer, which they already did. So I don't get that really. But I don't quite understand that. I think they obviously, from a revenue standpoint, this would be big for them to bring like Oregon and Washington in, just because Oregon is a big brand. But I don't think they will bring Oregon and Washington in, at least yet. Now, this could completely happen. I mean, this could happen this could even happen like a week from now, and I'll be biting my words, right? But it's just, I don't know that the Big Ten is going to do it this quick. And like I said, they want to not, or they don't want to rather, be a conference killer.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a messy situation, and I find it very hard to get excited or interested about it because it's been going on for so long. But I also feel like Notre Dame holds kind of a piece of the puzzle here because they have a lot of leverage if they want to go to the Big Ten. I don't know if the Big Ten has given up on Notre Dame, but Notre Dame has all the leverage in the world as an independent. And I brought on Brian Driscoll of Irish Breakdown, when USC and UCLA first left, to kind of talk about Notre Dame's, place in all of this. And I think that, Washington and Oregon are viewed as the top schools that the Big Ten would probably want to add. It would make things a lot easier from a scheduling standpoint with USC and UCLA on the West Coast, because that's one of the things the Big Ten wanted to do by adding those two schools is stretch across all the major time zones. And I think that Oregon and Washington would help them do just that. All right.
Which one do you want to transition into next?
I don't have too many more, and I think I might need to get going here in just a little bit. Let's see. We could do this one too from David. I do think Bo Nix could win the Heisman this year, but Oregon will have to have a hell of a year. What do you think? We can toss it over to you to start this one.
So I want to go ahead and preface this by saying that the person who commented this has been trolling the entire time, but let's go ahead and ignore that. Sure, he has. I do think, yes, that Bo Nix has all the tools, all the talent around him, but it's also not going to just be like, does he have the tools and the talent, or even the production? It's going to be also the team. If the team is good enough, if the team, let's say, is in the college football playoff, which I don't want to ever get my hopes up with this team because they always let me down in the end, but whatever. I don't know that he can even win it without Oregon being at least very, very close to the college football playoff. If they're fifth, maybe there's a chance, but I think they would probably have to be on the either on the cusp or in for him to win it, as well as having all these stats. I think these additions that have come through the transfer portal, even a freshman like Jurion Dickey or Kenyon Sadiq, and we talked about, like I just mentioned, even the transfer portal, and even the guy we're talking about today, Strother, on the O-line. Stuff like that helps you win games, that helps you win individual snaps, which obviously in turn helps you win the games. So it'll be interesting. I don't know really what. I don't know. I think that he probably will be close to it. I think he could be a finalist. I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to jinx him. I don't want any of that to happen. I do have slight concerns, hoping that he could maybe hold up his production, but I won't really get into that right now.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that on another show, but we can kind of start winding down and wrapping here. I think with Bo Nix and the Heisman conversation, he was in the Heisman conversation for a little bit last year, but like you were talking about with the need to kind of be on the cusp of a playoff appearance, the wheels kind of started to fall off after they lost to Washington, which coincidentally was the game when he got hurt, which obviously threw a wrench into the plans. But there's a lot of pressure on Bo Nix to, follow up that season from last year. And if he wants to ultimately be in the Heisman conversation again, he's going to kind of have to capture lightning in a bottle again, like he did with Kenny Dillingham, which was, like the perfect reunion. But I think that Will Stein could be the coach that helps him do that. I think he's, one of the most experienced passers, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in all of college football. He's matured a lot just as a player in terms of knowing when to take shots, when he can maybe be a little bit more of a risk taker, and versus taking what the defense gives him. So the O line should be stout up front. The Oregon probably has the best running backs in the Pac-12. And then you also have a lot of really talented weapons that he can throw the ball to. Maybe a little bit of a question mark or a TBD at tight end right now. But the wide receivers, you don't have any questions there. And I think that, there's no reason that he shouldn't be able to have that caliber of a season. Whether that happens or not, that's different. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what we have to say on the Bo Nix front. But as we start to wind down, Colin, anything else you want to add about Nico Reed or Nishad Strother?
Nothing really. I think we hit all of it.
All right. Yeah, we did hit all of it. And I think I'm going to be posting this as a 2-part podcast. So we'll have to see what's next for Oregon, but that's how you guys can expect this one to come out. If you guys want to find Colin, you can follow him on Twitter at, you actually go ahead and just plug yourself. I don't know about all of it.
It's at Insider Ducks on Twitter and at ducks.insider on Instagram. That's where you can find me. I'm trying to build a little bit more of a Twitter presence, so follow would be greatly appreciated.
All right. Yeah. So go make sure you tap in with Colin. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports, and you can follow me on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. Do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. I don't think there's any other podcast out there that covers Oregon recruiting like we do. And I'm super excited to just continue, hitting the recruiting trail, getting out to see some of these top players. And fun episode for the Ducks. Things keep rolling on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal. But until next time, thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.